am I interested in him or like, do I just, which this whole thing is also another weird conversation, or do I want the horse?
That damned horse.
That damn horse.
Was he trying to say that the guy with the good wheels is always going to get the chick? Is that what he's saying?
Oh, well. Yeah.
Some things never change.
Yeah.
He literally goes and tells Ciri, like, just play the victim, play the victim, play the victim, and just claim that, you were taken advantage of. And then he goes and takes advantage of her. Like, my brother in Christ, you have a crossbolt through your body. I think your blood is busy elsewhere. Like, I don't think this is going to be good, even if he did live. Welcome to Breakfast in Beauclair, a global Witcher podcast. My name is Alyssa from Good Morn, and I'll be your host as I enter international Hansa, accompanying Geralt of Rivia and his destiny, Cirilla of Sintra, across the continent. Well, this week we have a brand new Witcher book. Andrzej Sapkowski's Crossroads of Ravens is out now. I hope that you're all enjoying it. And through the US publisher, The Witcher Books, Abbe, myself and some members of our Hansa, Abbe from Sweden, who you hear on this episode, Stepan from the Czech Republic, and Sam from the US all had the opportunity to ask Andrzej Sapkowski questions about his latest novel. You can find our questions and his responses over on the Breakfast in Beauclair Instagram and YouTube. Lastly, Lengthy Tangent, my audio production house, is still crowdfunding. We have a brand new show that just came out last Friday called The Collection of Moyberg Graves, which will add some spooky flair to your Halloween season. Be sure to check out our other shows, Theme Party the Podcast, our anthology series, as well as Peculiar Radio, our award-winning flagship show. You can find all of these wherever you listen to Breakfast in Beauclair, and if you're keen, support our crowdfunding campaign on Indiegogo. Thank you to our patrons and our producer-level patrons, Katie the Redhead of Toussaint, Jacob Beast, Charlotte from Edinburgh Glamorai, The Original Roach, Libby, John of Reblia, Tom from Australia, Jill Kate the Tabby Witch, Ollie from Sweden, James Carson III, Miriam of Temeria, Softie, Lisa C., and Born Orpheus. If you would like to learn more about supporting Breakfast in Beauclair, visit patreon.com/breakfastinbeauclair. As for this episode, Abbe from Sweden and Softie from the UK continue our discussion of Andrzej Sapkowski's Tower of Swallows, Chapter 2, Part 2. Join us as we discuss Nilfgaardian amnesty, the yuckiest single-serving character, Ciri's journey, and Vysogota's role in it. Before we continue, here's again the synopsis of Chapter 2. In Chapter 2 of Tower of Swallows, we open on a storm and the dangerous riders passing through it. We meet Hotspur, who finds Ciri and the rats at a riverside postal station high on drugs as they're each tattooed. He has a quid pro quo relationship with the rats, trading them information for favors. Hotspur warns them that beyond the prefect of Amarilla, the Varhagans, and the Baron of Cassidy, they are now hunted by the infamous bounty hunter Bonhart, someone only the rich and powerful can afford. He also claims that amnesty will soon be granted as the Emperor of Nilfgaard intends to marry Princess Cirilla of Sintra. Realizing an impostor has taken her identity, Ciri seethes. Hotspur departs, telling them Bonhart waits in the town of Jealousy. The rats decide to confront him, but Ciri slips away, planning to reclaim her throne and return a hero. Missile catches her, and Ciri begs her to survive. Ciri catches Hotspur, who offers cynical advice for claiming amnesty. They're ambushed by horsemen, and Hotspur is mortally wounded. In the morning, Ciri claims his beautiful mare and names her Kelpie. Ignoring his warning, she desperately rides to Jealousy in an attempt to intercept the rats. But the rats arrive before her and call Bonhart from the inn. Ciri arrives too late. Bonhart has killed them all. Enraged, Ciri engages Bonhart in a duel neither can win. Eventually, she's forced to watch him behead each of her companions. Ciri recounts the memory to Vysogota, mourning the loss of her friends and lover in the cottage no one can see. Without further ado, let's get to our discussion of Andrzej Sapkowski's Tower of Swallows, Chapter 2, Part 2. And as Ciri leaves, she eventually catches up with Hotspur, who, as she said, didn't seem very surprised to see her. What might Hotspur's true motives be in offering Ciri very cynical advice about claiming amnesty? And is the offer of Nilfgaardian amnesty itself, do you think, like a genuine political strategy or a manipulative trap for people who they offer amnesty to?
You'd have to say that for reasons of state, which is Emir's favourite way of looking at things, he does a lot for reasons of state. I don't think they've got a choice. We know that Sintra are up in arms full of rebels. They've just had this big assault that they've carried out, and it hasn't gone entirely according to plan. It's succeeded in every way, but there are all sorts of trouble behind the lines, clearly. And what we get in going around, I don't know whether to call it Giso or Giso, but the province that they're in, this is the first time we, had a good look around in Nilfgaard. And just in this area alone, you've got the Varnhagens. There was that knight with the blue helmet. He was one of the Varnhagens, for instance, who fought the duel with Sweers, who was the Nilfgaardian knight, with the trappers who found Ciri in the desert. So there's two groups that are in conflict with each other. Then you've got the provincial governor, who's then got his own forces, who clearly has no control over the province at all. And you're looking around, and it's just, as always with Sapkowski, presents you with something from another perspective, which to them is like, well, Nilfgaard is this terrible, cohesive, I don't want to use the word monolithic, but you might have to. This huge empire that's really well controlled and stuff, this great big juggernaut that's going to roll over these little plucky northern kingdoms. But when you look behind the screen, of course, it's chaos. Emir's only taken over from a usurper. He's not in any real position of strength yet. And here we're seeing that there's not even close to being control in the province. And that perhaps being able to get all the bandits off the roads and stuff and get them into the army would be a brilliant move on their part if it would help control things. And maybe some of those police forces could then put on the uniform and travel north as well, where they're needed. But it will certainly put down the uprising in Sintra, which he needs to do. The political necessity for it is real, even though it's not his full, obviously, plan as to why he wants to marry Ciri. I don't think that there's any deception there. I think it is a true offer in this instance, although I'm sure if the rats came in and the right people were around it, they might not survive very long. They're not wrong when they say they can smell shavings from someone sharpening a stake.
Yeah, it's interesting. This summer, I recently read the first book of Sapkowski's other series.
His Sweet trilogy.
Yeah, exactly. I read The Tower of Fools, and there's a very similar situation where some of the knights, there are specifically robber knights running around in the story, and the bishop of Wroclaw, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but they're trying to summon their own army to fight this. And so they also send out this word of amnesty. Whatever you did, your sins will be forgiven. Instead, they're using religion as their way of cleansing, I suppose.
Yeah, it was literally framed as a crusade.
Yeah, literally.
You're doing God's work and you'll be forgiven for all your sins by taking part.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's a very effective way of getting, well, in this case, good killers in your army. For Emir, it's a smart move, even though he might get troublesome, quote unquote, people in his like camps. It's a price worth to pay.
Yeah. I'll talk about the amnesty and then I'll talk about Hotspur. And I think Vysogota, when he's originally telling Ciri like what has happened to him, he mentions that typically everybody is pardoned when there's a new emperor, but I am so highly treasonous that the death sentence is still applicable. On one hand, it does seem like, oh, because we're getting this new Cirilla of Sintra, like it's just what we do. We just like pardon everybody because this is a fresh start for the empire. So part of it, I assume, is that. And so I think on some level, even if it is kind of like cultural and empiric, Emir's not really thinking about this little tiny bandits on the outskirts of the empire, like kind of far outside of his reach, as you said, Softie. But it is bringing loyalty or, kind of buying loyalty in a way, as you also said, Abe. So I think it is sincere. It is likely like business as usual. I think at the same time, you have Hotspur, who Sapkowski has so many single-serving characters. Obviously, our OG legend Applegat, who also came up in the last episode as well. And then the man in the market who watches Ciri and the rats, slaughter somebody over a candy floss and everything else. I think Hotspur can go on the list as one of the yuckiest single-serve characters in the series. Yeah. And, I do think he is unnervingly strategic and kind of clinical about the advice that he gives her. He's just there are people who specifically want you flayed alive. But, if you just renounce everything and just say you were a victim and just pretend the whole thing isn't your fault and you just got mixed up in the wrong crowd, maybe you can get off with your life. And obviously she has a sense of, I think, both pride and loyalty to the rats. I think, again, regardless of what has happened, she just hates that immediately. But she's still, after her inheritance. So I think it's more like Hotspur knows the rats are going to die, and he's willing to like put his best advice forward, even if that advice is horrible, because she has joined him. And then all the weird stuff about, watching her get tattooed and then literally dying while sucking on a titty, pour one out.
Yeah.
Hotspur. What a way to go.
He did set out to ensnare her deliberately as well, when you look at it. Not just, once she's in his company and he's using the black horse, which isn't called Kelpie yet, to attract her, and she's getting annoyed by it because he's so manipulative. He reads her like a book. When he offered her the amnesty, it wasn't like, oh, you just turn yourself into the Nilfgaardians. It was, meet me at the Chimera's head and I'll put you under my protection.
Yeah.
So it was like, knew that he was sending the rats off one way and her going the other, that she would be coming to him to be in his company. And a chimera is a monster that's from different beasts all joined together, which is kind of a good description of him, really. Because what is he? Is he working for the merchants? Is he working for himself? What's he up to?
Yeah.
His claim that they're being attacked by common bandits. It's like, really? I don't think they are. But there was one other little funny thing I noticed was when they fell down the sort of cliffside to chase the horses away, and then they're trying to hide, and she's got loads of mushrooms stuck in her hair, and it just reminded me of the first time she tried to hide in the stories was back in the Blood of Elves. Do you remember?
Oh, yeah.
They're in the back of the wagon, and Triss is doing a "these are not the droids you are looking for" thing.
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember what Ciri claimed to be when they asked, what's that then?
She's like, I'm a mushroom.
Exactly. And here she is again hiding. She's got mushrooms in her hair.
Yeah.
What a insane, I think, sequence of events with Hotspur. But good riddance to that man.
Yeah, thank goodness.
Yeah.
He did another odd thing there, though. When he was touching the earrings in her ears, when he was doing his creepy, stalkery stuff anyway, but he would say, no, oh, these are just tourmalines. If you were with me, I'd give you emeralds. Calanthe used to have that big necklace of green emeralds, and that was Geralt's prize for helping out. That it all ties back in with her fate again.
Yeah, and she's often described as having like emerald eyes as well. I think even in the last chapter, Vysogota's like her huge childlike emerald eyes. She's still a princess, so like even Hotspur's gifts, like whether or not he knows, are still kind of paltry. I'm sure he's just gassing himself up.
Yeah.
Her fantasy is quite fun as well, though, because the classic thing you get is, I'm secretly the child of a king, and all this sort of thing. That's what people normally have. In this case, she's with her step family, wanting desperately to get back to her. She really knows she is a royal. That everything's all turned upside down again.
At some point, I did start to wonder, like, how much has he figured out? Does he know who she is or what she is or stuff like that? So at some point, I started questioning myself and him, I suppose, whether or not he was trying to get her into some sort of custody to gain some sort of benefit, a reward or whatever, or just some other way to get something on her.
I don't know if Hotspur would have claimed a bounty on her and like actually like turned her over to any sort of authority. But I would suspect, based on how he positions himself over the course of the chapter and his kind of like, I'm so smart internal dialogue, she is so fixated on Cintra, I would assume that he probably believes she at least came from there, or she was like a handmaiden of some kind or whatever. I doubt he would have pieced together that she was like the Princess Cirilla of Cintra, but she must have had some sort of like investment in the kingdom, because he's like, oh, can I ask where you were educated and all this other stuff? And he says like, oh, she's very caught up on like recent history. He probably suspected something, probably not just the truth.
Yeah, especially when it comes to like talking about history. Like back in that day, I guess it was very hard to get a hold of actual facts.
I think we're in the same cycle now, but yeah.
wait, yeah, definitely. We're going backwards. But back then, there was no information. So the take-home thing is that her having some sort of information or like being more informed than him, again, he sees himself as a very like knowing person. So he's very impressed, but also like I think his interest is piqued by it. It strikes him as odd.
There's no way that someone as clued up as he is hadn't put two and two together, that there's this, ashen-haired girl that everyone's been searching for, that there's a bounty out, and without saying who she is or why she's wanted, just that this person's suspected of being in the area, and Nilfgaard would like her delivered whole and unharmed. The idea that you would also announce that before then Emir is marrying Ciri, because it's literally at the announcement of the betrothal that Emir's listening, that's not Ciri. It's I know I would know Ciri at the ends of the earth sort of thing. So it's quite interesting that those two things are not connected in anyone's mind.
Yeah.
Because he's obviously not announced formally that this is a fake and he doesn't want anything to do with her. That would obviously give the game away completely. Whether or not Pottsburn's paths cross with Stefan Skelen's is the question there, but he's not in the area until a little bit later. Because I checked that, because I was wondering if the people that attacked them were maybe Skelen's Hansa, but they're not. They don't assemble for a few more days. We've got an actual date for that one and an actual date for for the fight and jealousy. So it's like few, a lot of the times I'm having to deal with, a few days is the description, which Alyssa, I'm sure you can explain how many a few days is.
It's at least 3.
That's the one. You are the expert on that.
Could you tell the panic? Sometimes I forget how thorough Softie's knowledge of the podcast is.
It's dangerous.
It is very dangerous. So we're pretty close to the end of the chapter at this point, and really get to the meat of the tragedy here in this chapter. So Bonhart's slaughter of the rats is both shockingly brutal and efficient. How does this scene deepen our understanding of him as a villain, and how does it undercut or reinforce the outlaw mythology that the rats lived by?
For me, in my case, I tried to start to compare Bonhart to Geralt in this specific scenario, because Geralt is very famously in the Lesser Evil story. He's also confronted by a gang in the middle of town with a bunch of villagers. Even though it's the same sort of scenario, you can see the clear differences between their working methods, I suppose. Whereas Geralt, he was trained to kill, but not by his choice or with his consent. He didn't choose to become a killer, while Bonhart, as far as we know, has specifically chosen, well, you know what, I want to kill people as a thing that I do. He might not be killing for pleasure, but definitely with a lot more of an intention to kill than Geralt usually is.
Yeah. Well, when we first met him and Skellen was like basically contracting Bonhart, I think the chilling way that we're introduced to him is Bonhart says, you're employing someone who really enjoys killing.
Oh, yeah.
And really enjoys their job. Not even whores can say that, is what he says.
Yeah.
And you get a taste, I think, and you get a promise of like what this character could bring. And then that is certainly delivered in this chapter.
He even goes as far as, like, right before he starts killing, he says, let the music play. It's music to him. Sword fighting is a lot of the time like referred to as a dance of sorts, but to him it's much more literal. For him, it's enjoyment. It's an art, maybe even.
Yeah, this is a very pointed question, but I think Abe, especially as like a music teacher and someone who lives and breathes music, when you think about like the joy that it brings you and why you chose that for a trade, how does that compare to Bonhart using the same language?
For me, it's just horrifying how he uses it. Like I said, it's art. Music is expressing yourself. It's showing your deepest desire, deepest feelings, I suppose. Him using that sort of language and that sort of way of talking about killing and murder and just torturing people he's just a psychopath. Like music making, music playing, whatever it is, or like any sort of art form, drawing, dancing, it requires work. It requires a lot of dedication. It's really telling of his character.
This also alludes to Sapkowski clearly loves westerns. For no reason at all, Bonhart's spurs are clanking when he comes out onto the porch. There's no reason for that at all. Why is he wearing spurs? This is, we're talking westerns again. There's the character in the spaghetti western who has his little music box playing. When the music stops, that's when the shooting starts. So in this one, it's, let it play.
Right.
The real counterpoint there is the last time he really strongly brought this to mind was the fight in Anchor against the Professor, where people are hearing it, so you don't actually see it, but it is really a shootout in the street. It really is the high noon situation. Geralt running up and down outside and people screaming and stuff. But
yeah,
that's the difference. When we've seen Geralt fight groups, as you say, in Blaviken and again in Oxenfurt when he fights the Michelet brothers, it's a real economy of effort, and it's about grace and speed. He moves through them quick as, shit through a goose, frankly. And it's just the tip of his sword, just catching people on the backs of the neck and things, and just collapsing them as they stand. And Whereas Bonhart, the difference here is this horrible primeval sort of strength of the man, this great big gaunt giant old man, but it's the power of his blows that seems to be so awful. When he hits Missile on the ground and she spins, somersaults through the air against the wall and stuff, this is massive strength. And that's the problem Ciri has fighting him, that she's more than capable of fighting him, but she's just finding it's her arms going numb from having to try and parry his blows and stuff. Just the strength with which they're delivered is what's defeating her. She begins to think that that's all it is, that she pulls off the Lambert trick that he taught her on the comb and uses the power of the parry to swing around him, and then expecting him to be open, and then finding that he's waiting for it. He knows it's coming. He's seen that trick before, and it's like, oh my God, this is an experienced ice cold killer, that what can the poor little witcher girl do against him,
Yeah.
And then the indignity of being punched rather than stabbed, that was a bit of a blow for her.
Yeah. I do find it powerful that you guys keep bringing in the other kind of like one-on-many fights we've seen throughout the series, because often it is Geralt against an army of brutes. And we see, his daughter in the reversed role, where previously we would have seen Geralt not necessarily as an underdog per se, but like, a solo fighter in this fight and being ganged up on. And again, because Ciri is our hero, we have never been on the losing side in any of these big fights before, and you're actually seeing and feeling the like effects of this and like the horror that she's experiencing. I think, again, regardless of what you think about the rats, and I know that some people hate them enough that they're very excited about this scene, but I think it's a very like shocking blow to the readers as well, and it definitely undercuts, as the original question said, this idea of invincibility that they seem to have just the day before. And they really are like just kids. And when you think about Bonhart, like, yes, this is a man who doesn't have any qualms about killing, doesn't have any qualms about killing teenagers. But I think it deepens our understanding of him as a villain because, he's clearly not all talk. Whatever we heard about him and heard from him in the previous book, he is like nothing that we've seen in the continent before. He is unparalleled, both in terms of Geralt's story as well as Ciri's. And I think she sees the same thing. Like the rats are very much like, no one's ever beaten us, and then that's true until you do. It's a very jarring book. So we know that Ciri is like yet again going to fall into another situation that she has never experienced before. And I think she says as much when she's recounting the story to Vysogota, and she explains like how Bonhart tied her up on the hitching post, didn't think he was going to kill her. He certainly could while she was restrained, but he chooses not to and instead forces her to watch as he beheads each of her friends and her lover. Yeah, and like I said, I think it is pure shock value as you're reading it, and the acknowledgement that this is something we've never seen before.
Actually, the last thing that they saw of each other, unfortunately, was Ciri obviously horrified on the ground looking at Missile, literally with the life going out of her eyes. So they did get one last chance to be together, but not in a way anyone would have asked for.
Yeah.
It's a horrifyingly described scene. The battle itself with how he kills them is one thing, but the things that he says to her right after, this is death. Look at it. He's forced her.
He's got a villager holding her head up, other one's holding her eyes open so she can't look away either.
It's like unnecessarily cruel.
Yeah, he's enjoying this somehow.
Yeah. Shockingly, not the worst person she's ever going to meet either.
Yeah.
Everybody is horrible in their own little different ways.
Yeah.
That's The Witcher.
Yeah, that's The Witcher. But the villagers, I really wonder, like, did he threaten them? Were they just like, okay, yeah, we're going to do whatever this guy says. We don't want to get into trouble in any way. Or, like, are they also seeing this as a justice towards this gang that they might have heard about? They might have had, like, neighbors or, like, relatives in the nearby villages that had been robbed by them. Maybe they're seeing this as a sort of justice.
Yeah. That's a really interesting question. Softie, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, where you were saying about how does this feed in with, the outlaw story and stuff. And, this is a very strong part of it. While they're alive and distributing coins around the villages and stuff that they're to buy their silence and stuff, the rats are kind of everyone's friend. But now they're dead, well, they're just dead. So, they can't distribute money anymore. So no one's going to be on their side anymore. And that's where you go from the romantic, thumbing your nose in the face of authority outlaws that everyone thinks are kind of cool and they'd like to dress like them and stuff, to now the story is, oh, those evil, murdering, raping bastards, they've met their comeuppance, in the town of jealousy. You think back to those songs like Big Iron, with everyone talking about, the amazing swiftness of the marshal that day when he gunned down this evil murderer and stuff. And that suddenly becomes the hero. There's that terrific Western, is it The Murder of Jesse James by the Coward Robert Ford, which shows how that whole cycle works, that Jesse James and his desperados and stuff actually in that instance become, sainted figures after the fact, whereas at the time people were terrified of them. Horrible, vicious, murdering brutes. So that one went the other way.
I noticed another Western inspired thing when it comes to the actual town of Jealousy. It's described to, after having burned down, it's built up with one big main street. I haven't watched that many Westerns, but from what I remember, a lot of towns were built exactly that way, with one big town, the stores just lining along. So that's another sort of reference, maybe.
You've also got When the Rats Are Riding In, and Giselher's saying, if I hear one crossbow or anything, we're going to take you all out. And that is almost definitely referring to The Unforgiven with Clint Eastwood, which came out just before this was written and won the Oscars that year and stuff, where Clint Eastwood's figure has been through all the terrible violence in the town and he wants to leave. Everyone's terrified. He's killed lots of people already that day. Anybody moves, anything happens, I'm going to come back here and burn this town down, kill every one of you sons of bitches. And it's all like, oh, it's all he had to do. He's got no chance. He's got 30 people armed outside. They should gun him down, but they're just terrified of him. And I think Bonhart's probably got the same sort of hold over this town.
Yeah, I feel like it's almost like the way that we started the chapter, where you're just in your home and you're hiding and you're hoping that nobody is going to find you. And I feel like it's the same. It's like watching, Titans clash, and you're just a mere mortal, and there's nothing for you to do other than, watch as all of this unfolds. So I'm sure that is a part of it too. I think whether or not people intended it, they were complicit just because nothing was happening. But again, what do you do if a bunch of gods start battling in front of you and there's nothing you really can do?
It all just comes down to surviving. Everyone in this whole universe they're just trying to survive. Being honorable it's plan B.
Yeah. And as we get to the end of the chapter, Ciri rides to Jealousy to confront Bonhart and the rats, despite repeated warnings, and later recounts the massacre to Vysogota. Do you think her going to Jealousy and trying to catch the rats, was that courage, recklessness, inevitability? And what happens to her as she's retelling this to Vysogota?
It's very much destiny here. I don't think there was anything else going to happen, even when it was laid down to her as a story. Well, it's the classic story. If I turn left, I'll never come back. If I she ends up going to Jealousy anyway, even though she tried to go the other way. I think it's fair to say that Ciri is broken in Jealousy by this awful thing that happens. And I don't think she's ever even starts healing until she goes back to Jealousy, which doesn't happen till the Lady of the Lake. So, there's a very important part of her return there that, obviously I'm not going to spoil, but that kind of helps to put a cap on things for her. She's at least got a chance of healing from a certain point. And here, this is just the beginning of dealing with it with Vysogota, I think.
Yeah.
Just unburdening herself. This awful thing happened. She's had it echoing in her head probably ever since, she hasn't been able to unsee it. At least she's been able to say what she's seen now. Maybe it's going to stop playing in front of her eyes at this point. That would be nice to think.
I actually suspected it was the other way, where since Jealousy happened, we know very little because of the framing narrative. But the fact that we end the chapter with her just breaking down in tears and heaving and sobbing as Vysogota just awkwardly tries to comfort her, I think the scale of her reaction to me feels like that she didn't have time to process it at all.
Right.
That whatever happened between the rats dying and her entering Vysogota's cottage, she had never told anybody what she experienced, and she probably didn't even have the time or space or energy or what have you to really think about what she had witnessed. I do agree, Softie, that her telling Vysogota is probably the start of that grief and that acceptance, but I would assume it was actually quite delayed.
I think I do agree, seeing how she has something horrible like happen to her. I also agree that she doesn't really have time to process any of it. Again, she's just trying to survive all this way until she gets to Vysogota. It's the first sort of break, the first sort of time to heal, literally both physically but also mentally. So it's even though it's the first time she's able to actually talk about it, she's still reluctant. She finds things to get distracted by. She starts looking at the mice that are running around the house. She starts to comment on them, and then Vysogota he tells her, "Well, please do go on," and she just sits there and stares and please go on. He sort of has to push her a bit because I think he realizes that she needs this. He very much takes the role of a therapist. A big part of a therapist is just to listen.
And a guide, I think, of sorts.
Exactly, definitely. And sort of just to help her think about things. She hasn't had the comfort or the luxury to think about what happened and to like recall it within her mind. I think him listening and him showing sympathy, her getting to throw out her frustration of calling back to her being angry at the niece. If you only knew how much of a princess I was, she starts talking to him and asking like, "Do you understand that frustration?" All he says is, "I do." He acknowledges her and all that she's feeling. I think it's the first time she's heard that from somebody in a long time.
Alyssa, you were saying earlier about, it's surprising how early in the book this, revelation comes about this terrible thing that she's experienced. You would think normally you'd be building up to it, wouldn't you? I think it's because the book is really, it's ratcheting back on the tension inside Ciri about when she launches herself as this angel of death, this venging figure, that's the culmination of the story, really. And it's like getting it this early, you understand what it is that's driving her and getting her to that point where she's going to put the soot and the goose fat around her eyes. My favorite vision is Ciri, those blacked out eyes and everything. Just think that's an amazingly visual piece of writing. I think that's why it has to be there. But I also love that you made reference to that little ongoing soap opera with the mice and the cat.
It's described as like the mice having a circus in the candlelight.
Well, it's just glorious because I don't know if you mentioned it in the last chapter, but when Ciri's lying, unconscious, he's actually throwing bits of bread to the mice. The reason there's so many mice in there is the old bugger's been throwing bread to them.
It's because he's feeding them.
He's obviously clearly embarrassed about that, but I think he just wanted company. When his cat had left, I think if he fed the mice, maybe the cat would come back.
Well, it sounds like the cat's not much use at all.
Yeah. When she says, if you got a cat here, you could keep this under control. And he says, "Oh, it did have a cat, but it ran away." I said, "Sure, you live in the marshes, anything could have happened to it. Yeah, you haven't seen the cat. It would have taken a dragon to take that cat."
So on that, lighthearted note, to the end of this chapter, we've come to the end of our discussion. Do you guys have any final thoughts on chapter 2 of Tower of Swallows?
Yeah, I mean, there was one little snippet that I rather enjoy. It's more from reading it now, sort of from a later perspective. There's the moment when Missel and Ciri have already retired for the night, and the other 5 rats are around the table, and he has this wonderful description of them that they're all leaning into each other and they're so close that they can feel the heat from the candle, and they're all whispering about what they're going to do and stuff. It's like a trope in anime that you get that, where all the characters suddenly their faces suddenly loom up really close from underneath, and they're all, when people are all thinking things. That comes up in most recently, Delicious in Dungeon had a sequence like that with all the characters who were wanting to, eat something, or suddenly all looking quite sinister like that. And it was, again, it's the perspective that they're all close together like that. And it kind of reminds you of things like the potato eaters and stuff. All the people around the table is like a thing of closeness. But then you get the wife of the station master who's there, who's just listening to their horrible, insidious, evil giggling. That she just thinks these are the most loathsome people alive.
The description of giggling as well.
Very ominous.
Yeah. I think insidious is a good way to describe it.
It's really a sort of turning point for Ciri. I suppose she's already been in a sort of villain arc, but this really unlocks her grand evil, if you want to put it that way. Again, whatever you think about the rats, for me it's both sad and heartwarming in a way, seeing their interactions, the way they make fun of each other, but in a in a way where that's how they talk to each other, that they've created a group. That's how they are. That's how they are. They feel connected to this thing that they've created. It becomes a part of surviving. Something about it is very sweet, seeing the humanity within them.
There is that beautiful sequence when Iskra and Ciri or Falkera are dancing on the table at the barn dance. Just think that's glorious. For a few minutes, it all goes away, and it's all those amazing steps she's learned at Moorhen. Suddenly, it's turning into a beautiful dance. And the pair of them strutting their stuff on the table, just fantastic. A real beautiful memory for her out of such evil. But still, those little moments can turn up.
I think that's what they're trying to seek in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as you said, Abe, whatever, you think about the rats, they are such a critical part of Ciri's story. And even though their tenure was quite short, just a couple of chapters, it has a profound impact on her. If I look at this chapter as a whole, obviously we know what a great writer Sapkowski is or we wouldn't be here, but I think how it's written in such a focused way. We can talk about its opening and that little scene that happens in the storm. Even it has its own little arc. You have kind of the rats, and then you have that point of no return where they choose to see Bonhart, and then you have the climax of the chapter alone. And then, obviously they come down from it when Ciri is briefly telling Vysogota what has happened. And so even from a storytelling perspective, it just feels very tight and well done, in kind of a literary and structural sense. So I think reading it back and really thinking about this as a chapter and preparing to discuss it, I really admired that. And yeah, this is such a brutal, memorable chapter, infamously memorable chapter. And it is very heavy to talk about. It's actually at a certain point in the conversation, I was like, do I have to speed this up by 1.1 or 1.2? Because we're between the three of us, we're just all, taking these very labored pauses and really thinking about what has happened and the gravity of what has happened to this character. So it's a hard one, I think, to get through as both a reader and as a host. So thank you guys, of course, for joining me for this discussion. Yeah, and thank you to listeners as you're still here, making it through as we think all process this together. Of course, appreciate that too. Any final thoughts or?
With all the pauses that we're having to go through, that's also the sort of pauses that Ciri's having to go through when she's retelling it to Vysogota. I think it's an amazingly written chapter in how you really get to experience her processing this, just as we've had to process it today.
I hadn't realized, but obviously you've read it 2 or 3 times preparing for this, and it didn't seem that big a deal. But actually talking about it, you realize that that is what Ciri's going through. This is hard to talk about. It's you can read it and know what's happened and stuff, but it's how do you just chat about it as if it's there's something I read in a book, and it's not something I really want to imagine particularly. The relationships are complicated, the things that happen are horrifying, and then he manages to just keep it all grey by saying, yeah, but they kind of deserve it, don't they? Well, yes, but no one deserves that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not that simple, guys.
As I said, I really do appreciate both of you taking the time to discuss this with me in all of its nuance and complexity and, grief. That sounds somber as hell, but that is going to be it for our show today. Abe, Softie, thank you guys so much for joining us for this episode, and thank you to our Hansa for listening. You can find both Abe and Softie in the Hansa Discord, and Softie there running discussions with Kitty, who you guys will meet in the next episode or two. And next episode, join us as we continue our discussion with Andrzej Sapkowski's Tower of Swallows, Chapter 3. Thanks for joining us at Breakfast Table. For show notes, transcripts of each episode, and complete list of our social platforms and listening services, head over to breakfastandmoclair.com. Breakfast and Moclair is created by Alyssa from Good Morning. It's hosted by Alyssa. The show is edited by Alyssa and Caleb Byes, with music by Alex Berner. Breakfast and Moclair is produced by Alyssa in New York City, with Katie, the redhead of Toussaint, Jacob B. Shot from Magberg Glamry, the original Roach, Libby, John Ripley, Tom from Australia, Jill, Kate the Tabby Witch, Ollie from Sweden, James Carson III, Mira, Tamaria, Softie, Lisa C., and Born Orpheus. Special thanks to Abe and Softie for joining us for this episode, and our international Hansa for their support.